we're taking this stack of sources you've shared and sifting through them to explore two, well, really towering figures from Iranian history, Khajeh Nezam al-Molk and Hasan Sabbah, often shrouded in mystery, wouldn't you say?
Absolutely. We've got a lot of material here covering their lives, their actions, and perhaps most fascinatingly, that intense rivalry between them. It's a really pivotal period.
Yeah, it really is. So the mission here, I think, is to unpack what these sources actually tell us. Who were they really? What was their world like? And maybe most importantly, what's the true story behind their conflict? Trying to move beyond, the popular legends.
And those legends are powerful, especially when you mention Hasan Sabbah, right? For so many people, the immediate thought is the Hashan, the fortress of Alamut. It's all very mysterious and often, as the sources suggest, quite misunderstood.
Definitely. So let's just jump right in. Let's see what this material reveals, starting with, well, that very famous legend you often hear. You know the one I mean. That widespread story in Iran about the three schoolmates, Khajeh Nezam al-Molk, the poet Omar Khayyam, and Hasan Sabbah.
Right, the famous pact. They supposedly swore that whoever got powerful first would, help the others out.
And the story goes that Nezam al-Molk becomes this incredibly powerful vizier, but, well, forgets about Hasan Sabbah, or maybe deliberately snubs him.
Exactly. And that supposed betrayal is what kicks off Sabbah's lifelong quest for revenge, according to the legend.
It's a great story, very dramatic, makes for a neat explanation. But what do the sources actually say when we dig into it? Does this schoolmate pact hold up?
Not really, no. That's one of the first things the sources push back against. They indicate Nezam al-Molk was, well, significantly older than Hasan Sabbah and Omar Khayyam.
Older? How much older?
We're talking maybe 30 years or more, closer to their father's age, really. So the idea of them being, kids in the same classroom, it just doesn't fit the timeline presented in these sources.
Okay, so if a schoolmate pact is likely a myth, then what was the real reason for this deep-seated hatred between them? It obviously wasn't just some childhood grudge.
To get at that, we really need to understand who each of them was, where they came from. The sources lay out their paths quite clearly. Let's maybe start with Hasan Sabbah.
Sounds good. Where did he come from?
He was born around 1050 AD in Qom. His family initially followed Twelve-Imam Shia Islam.
But the sources highlight a big change in his religious life, don't they?
A pivotal shift, absolutely. At some point, he converted and became a really devoted follower of Ismailism. That's a different branch of Shia Islam, sometimes called Seven-Imam Shia.
Okay, and how do the sources explain Ismailism for us? What's the key difference?
Well, they explain it as a major Shia group who believed that Ismail, who was the son of the sixth Imam Jafar al-Sadiq, was the rightful seventh Imam. That's the main point of divergence from the Twelvers. And the sources note Ismailism was historically pretty important, especially its power base in Egypt.
Egypt comes up a lot with him, doesn't it? The sources even mention a modern Egyptian TV show about the Hashan.
Yeah, suggesting that historical link might still resonate today. And Egypt was crucial for Hasan Sabbah personally. He actually traveled there when he was younger, maybe in his 20s or 30s.
Why Egypt specifically?
For education, primarily. At that time, Egypt was ruled by the Fatimid Caliphate. They were Ismailis themselves, claimed the Imanat, and Cairo was this major center of Ismaili thought and power.
So his time there must have really solidified his beliefs.
It seems so. He fully embraced Ismailism there, studied with top scholars. And when he came back to Iran, he wasn't just, a believer. He was appointed as a Hujjat.
A Hujjat? What's that?
Basically, a senior representative or maybe a chief propagandist for the Fatimid Imam, specifically for the Iranian plateau. His mission was clear: spread Ismaili beliefs and ideas among the Iranians.
And what was Iran like then? Was it receptive to his message?
The sources paint a picture of, quite a bit of turmoil. There was widespread dissatisfaction with the old Abbasid Caliphate, and the Seljuk era, while powerful, was marked by instability, lots of internal fighting, external threats like the early Crusades starting up.
So people were maybe looking for alternatives.
Exactly. It created fertile ground. Hasan Sabbah's message directly challenged the existing religious authority, Sunni Abbasids, and their Seljuk allies. He presented his Ismaili path as the true Islam.
And did he find followers?
He did, quite quickly, according to the sources. Gained support in various cities, especially Persian-speaking areas like Gorgan, Sari, Damavand. But to really consolidate, he needed a base, a secure headquarters.
Which brings us to Alamut.
Yes. Around 1090 AD, the sources say he made this absolutely crucial strategic move. He chose Alamut Castle as the center for the Ismaili movement in Iran.
Alamut. What does the name actually mean?
The sources say it translates to eagle's nest, from al or aleh for eagle, and amut for nest. A pretty fitting name, actually, given his later title, Lord of Alamut.
And what was the fortress itself like? Was it already impressive?
It was initially an old, ruined military fort, apparently built way back by the Abbasids, but Hasan Sabbah transformed it, he rebuilt it, expanded it massively, added serious defenses, sophisticated water systems, large storage facilities.
The sources mentioned something specific about the site before he fixed it up.
Yeah, a rather strange detail. Apparently it had a foul smell initially. His work, bringing in water, cultivating the land around it, supposedly improved the whole environment there.
And the location was key for defense, right?
Oh, absolutely. Remote, mountainous, incredibly hard for a conventional army to attack effectively. It was a brilliant defensive position.
But his strategy wasn't just about Alamut alone.
No, not at all. To build a real network, a state within a state, really, he captured other strategic forts across different regions. Places like Shadaj, Koyistan, Lamasar are mentioned. It was about creating these strongholds to resist the Seljuks.
Now, there seems to be a key turning point mentioned in the sources regarding his relationship with the Fatimids back in Egypt.
Yes, a major event. The death of the Fatimid Caliph, Al-Mustansir Billah, in 1094, that caused a big succession crisis in Cairo.
A power struggle. And Hasan Sabbah had to pick a side.
He did. He backed Nizar, who was the caliph's eldest son. But Nizar lost out. He was killed in the conflict.
So Hasan Sabbah backed the losing horse, essentially. What did that mean for him?
Well, he was the top Ismaili leader, the Hujjat, in Iran and Central Asia, so he used that authority. He essentially took over leadership of the Nizaris, those Ismailis in Iran, Iraq, Syria, who still supported Nizar's claim. The sources actually point out that the Nizaris are the largest Ismaili branch today, and maybe his actions were key to that.
And this led to a formal break with Egypt.
A complete break. He cut all ties with the Fatimid leadership in Cairo and, crucially, declared the foundation of his own independent Ismaili state, centered right there in Alamut. This was him setting up his own political entity, a direct challenge to Seljuk power.
Okay, so that's Hasan Sabbah's rise. Now let's pivot to his great rival, Khajeh Nezam al-Molk. The sources describe him as, well, arguably one of the most famous viziers in all of Iranian history.
Absolutely. He served the big Seljuk sultans, Alp Arslan and Malik Shagar, for almost 30 years. He was born earlier, remember, around 1018 AD, very well educated in religion, literature, administration. He got into Seljuk service just as they were really taking over.
And his role in that Seljuk empire. The sources stress how important he was, especially after the Seljuks took Baghdad in 1055.
He was central, absolutely crucial in unifying Iran politically under the Seljuks. You have to remember, the sources point out, the Seljuks were originally Turkic nomads. They were great warriors, but lacked the experience to run a huge, complex empire like Persia.
So they relied on Iranians.
Heavily. On educated, experienced Persian administrators like Nizam al-Molk to actually run the state. He's credited in the sources with establishing their rule over this vast territory, unparalleled in Islamic history up to that point, according to one source.
What were some of his main contributions, as listed in the sources?
Well, beyond the political unity, expanding the empire's borders, suppressing rebellions, his most lasting legacy, the one the sources really emphasize, is the founding of the Nizamiya schools.
Ah, yes, the Nizamiyas. Very famous.
Hugely influential. These were state-funded colleges, madrasas that he set up in major cities all across the empire, Baghdad, Nishapur, Isfahan, many others.
And their purpose?
They promoted Sunni scholarship, specifically the Shafii school that Nizam al-Molk followed. The sources note how quickly these schools spread. They became this massive intellectual and cultural force, a very clear counterweight to movements like Ismailism, promoting the Seljuk-backed version of Islam.
Okay, so we have the powerful Sunni vizier running the empire, and the charismatic Ismaili leader building his own state in the mountains. Let's go back to the root of their conflict. If it wasn't the school pact, what do the sources say sparked it?
The sources suggest the friction started much earlier, possibly even during a brief period when Hasan Sabbah might have been at the Seljuk court before he went to Egypt.
So even back then. And the core issue was?
Religion. Plain and simple, according to these sources. Nizam al-Molk was a devout Shafii Sunni. And more than that, he actively opposed Shias in general, and Ismailis in particular, within the court. He saw them as a threat.
A threat to the Seljuk state.
Both religious and political order, yeah. And the sources suggest that even then Hasan Sabbah didn't back down, he pushed back against Nizam al-Molk's views.
So fast forward a few years, Nizam al-Molk is the all-powerful vizier, Hasan Sabbah has Alamut. That initial friction just explodes.
Exactly. The religious and political disagreements became open warfare. It was inevitable, really, given their positions.
And how did Nizam al-Molk and the Seljuks portray the Ismailis? The sources mention specific terms.
They waged a serious propaganda campaign called the Mulid heretics, apostates. They spread rumors to demonize them, like that story about Hasan Sabbah claiming to be divine, the god of Alamut, which the sources treat as slander aimed at justifying wiping them out.
And wasn't there a specific policy disagreement, too? Something about land grants?
Yes, the ICTA system. Nizam al-Molk used it, granting land revenues to military commanders. The sources say Hasan Sabbah strongly opposed this policy, arguing it harmed the general population. So that added another layer, a socioeconomic dimension to the conflict.
Right. Now, the tactics used by Hasan Sabbah's followers are legendary. Let's talk about the name Hassan. The sources discuss the popular theory connecting it to hashish, to drugs.
Yes, that's the most famous explanation, isn't it? That the name comes from followers supposedly using hashish to get motivated or maybe experience visions of paradise before suicide missions.
But the sources offer other possibilities.
They do. Some historians mention in the material favor an alternative theory, that the name might have come from something more mundane, maybe relating to the region's medicinal plants, or even just people who sold herbs. Hashish, just meaning plant or herb, and hashashin, meaning sellers or gatherers of herbs.
Interesting. But regardless of where the name came from, what do the sources conclude about what actually motivated these followers, the Fidayeen? Was it drugs?
This is really key. The sources strongly argue against the drug theory as the primary motivator. They state pretty clearly that intense indoctrination, brainwashing if you like, and fervent ideology were more than enough. Hasan Sabbah's charisma and teachings were, as one source puts it, more potent than any opium.
So who were these Fidayeen? Describe them based on the sources.
They were followers who were absolutely, unquestioningly devoted, willing to die instantly for Hasan Sabbah's cause. The sources use comparisons to modern concepts like martyrdom operations or suicide missions.
How did they operate?
Secretly. Often living embedded within normal society, sometimes for long periods, waiting for the command. Then they'd strike, usually targeting very high-profile enemies, often assassinating them up close with a hidden dagger, as the sources say.
The sources include some really striking stories illustrating this devotion, don't they?
They do. There's that quote attributed to Hasan Sabbah in a message to the Seljuk Sultan Malik Shah, basically boasting that his soldiers didn't care if they killed or were killed, that their loyalty was unparalleled.
And the most famous one, perhaps, involves Seljuk envoys visiting Alamut.
Ah, yes, the dramatic demonstration. The sources recount the story where Hasan Sabbah, to show the envoys the fanaticism of his followers, supposedly ordered 3 different men to kill themselves right there.
Now,
One supposedly stabbed himself, another leaped from the fortress wall, and a third drowned himself, just on command. The sources describe the envoys being absolutely terrified, realizing the kind of weapon Hasan Sabbah wielded, not just swords, but this absolute human devotion. They left wondering how many more like that he had.
and it wasn't just a bluff. The Seljuk armies struggled against him.
They really did. The sources confirm that major military campaigns against Alamut often failed, and the reputation, the sheer terror associated with the Hashashin spread far and wide. It reached Europe, leading to the word assassin entering European languages.
The sources even connected to modern pop culture.
Yeah, they mention the Assassin's Creed games as a modern reflection, however fictionalized, of this historical period, featuring Alamut, the assassins, even some historical figures. Shows how enduring the legend is.
Okay, beyond the assassinations, what do the sources tell us about the specific beliefs and practices inside Alamut under Hasan Sabbah? Anything unusual?
Well, there's mention of an interest in what the sources call eclectic mathematics, possibly influenced by Pythagorean ideas about the mystical significance of numbers.
Numbers were important.
Very. The sources list specific numbers held in high regard: 5, 7, 12, 24, 30, especially the number 7.
Wait, 7.
They apparently saw it everywhere. The sources list examples they used: 7 heavens, 7 earths, the 7 verses in the Fatiha, the opening of the Quran, 7 points of the body touching the ground in prayer, 7 orifices in the face, all seen as pointing to the mystical power of 7.
And they use numerology, too, assigning numerical values to letters.
Yes, abjad. The sources describe them using it to find hidden meanings in names and events. There's an example given where the abjad value of the word Alamut supposedly matched the numerical value of the year he captured it. They presented these kinds of coincidences as divine signs or full of hidden wisdom. The sources even make a comment about how similar superstitious interpretations based on numbers persist today.
Was there a clear structure to his organization?
Yes, a distinct hierarchy, sometimes described as having 7 levels of initiation or rank. The Fadain, the ones carrying out the assassinations, were often placed at the 7th, perhaps the most committed level.
And Hasan Sabbah himself, how did he live in Alamut?
The sources portray him as living a pretty ascetic life, actually. Strict. He had a large library, apparently knew some Latin and Greek, and spent most of his time studying, writing, and in worship, all within the fortress. He rarely left, if ever, in his later years.
There's that one chilling detail the sources mention about his daily routine.
Ah, yes. The rather grim note that he apparently ended his daily prayers by receiving the latest news of successful sacred assassinations carried out by his followers. It really underscores how central these acts were to his whole project.
Which brings us back to the assassination of his main rival, Nizam al-Molk. When did that happen?
That was in 1092 AD. The sources describe how a fidei, named as Abu Tahir Arani, killed him while the vizier was traveling. The method was classic Hujjat. The assassin approached pretending to be a petitioner, wanting to hand him a letter or document.
And Hasan Sabbah's reported reaction?
Stark and brutal. The sources quote him directly. Killing this devil is the beginning of happiness.
Wow. And according to the historian Bernard Lewis, who the sources cite, this wasn't just a one-off act of revenge.
No, Lewis frames it as something bigger. He argues this assassination was effectively the first in a long, systematic campaign of targeted political killings by the Ismailis against their enemies. Sultans, commanders, judges, influential scholars, anyone who stood in their way.
What was the immediate fallout from Nizam al-Mulk's death?
Huge instability. The sultan he served, Malik Shah Feller, died himself just 40 days later.
40 days? That's quick.
Very. And the sources note there were rumors at the time, though they present them just as rumors that Malik Shah might have been poisoned. Perhaps by Nizam al-Mulk's own faction, who maybe blamed the sultan for not protecting the vizier enough, or perhaps suspected the sultan was involved. It hints at tension, even at the top.
And Malik Shah's death created chaos.
Complete chaos. The Seljuk court descended into infighting, succession struggles between his sons. And this power vacuum was exactly what Hasan Sabbah exploited. While the Seljuks were fighting each other, he consolidated and expanded his own power base.
Did the Seljuks try to strike back at Alamut later?
Oh yes. Subsequent sultans like Barkiruk launched campaigns. They got support from Sunni clergy, who issued fatwas, religious decrees, calling for jihad against the Ismailis as heretics. Many Ismailis were executed when captured.
But they retaliated.
They did, with more assassinations of key Seljuk figures. It became this deadly back and forth.
And ultimately, were the Seljuks successful in crushing Alamut during Hasan Sabbah's lifetime?
No. Barkiruk, for instance, failed. Partly, the sources say, because he was too busy with his own internal Seljuk rivalries. Eventually, a later powerful sultan, Sanjar, actually ended up making peace, or at least a truce, with Hasan Sabbah.
Peace? Why? Was it military stalemate?
Partly, but the sources emphasize the psychological factor, the sheer terror the Hassan instilled. There's an incredible story illustrating this about how Hasan Sabbah managed to get a dagger placed right beside Sultan Sanjar's bed while he slept.
Inside the Sultan's own camp.
Apparently so. Along with a note basically saying, "We could have killed you." It was pure psychological warfare, demonstrating Sanjar's vulnerability. According to the sources, that terrified Sanjar into accepting peace.
So they used fear as much as actual violence. Is there another example of that?
Yes, the story involving the famous Sunni theologian Imam Fakhr al-Razi. He was known for writing and preaching against the Ismailis.
What happened to him?
According to the sources, a fidei infiltrated his inner circle, posing as a student for months. Then, one day, confronted him privately, held a dagger to him, and basically forced him to stop his public criticism.
Did they kill him?
No, they just threatened him into silence. And then, the sources add this bizarre twist. Hasan Sabbah later secretly sent Imam Razi a pension, money. It shows this weird mix of terror and pragmatism. Scare them, but maybe also buy their silence.
The overall effect on their enemies must have been profound.
Absolutely. The sources talk about rulers, commanders, scholars living in constant fear. Some reportedly even took to wearing armor or helmets constantly, even while sleeping. That's the level of pervasive dread Hasan Sabbah and his Fedayeen created.
How did Hasan Sabbah's life end?
He died in Alamut, the fortress he almost never left, in 1124 AD. He was quite old, around 80.
And succession. Did he name someone?
Yes, he appointed one of his trusted commanders, Buzurg Umid, to succeed him. And the sources mention a really chilling detail related to this.
With that?
It's reported that Hasan Sabbah actually had his own sons executed before his death.
His own sons. Why?
Apparently, to prevent any potential dynastic disputes or challenges to his chosen successor, Buzurg Umid. The sources interpret this as showing his ultimate priority was the survival and strength of the Nizari Ismaili organization itself, above even his own family.
And did the organization survive him? Did the assassinations continue?
They did, yes. Under Buzurg Umid and subsequent leaders, the Hashishin continued their activities for many decades.
So what finally brought the Ismaili state of Alamut down?
Not the Seljuks, ultimately. The sources state that their end came much later, with the Mongol invasions. It was Chinggis Khan and his successors, particularly Hulagu Khan, who finally besieged and destroyed Alamut and other Nizari strongholds in the mid-13th century. The sources even grimly note that Chinggis Khan was arguably even more destructive than Hasan Sabbah himself.
It's interesting how differently these two figures, Nizam al-Molk and Hasan Sabbah, are remembered. The sources touch on that.
They do. They point out that, for instance, some historians, particularly from the Khorasan region, view Nizam al-Molk as perhaps the greatest Iranian statesman after the coming of Islam, essential for building the nation under the Seljuks.
And Hasan Sabbah.
Some Shia historians, on the other hand, might view him more positively as the founder of what could be seen as the first truly independent Shia state that directly challenged Sunni dominance in the region.
So completely opposing views depending on the perspective.
Pretty much. But what seems clear from all the material is that both men, despite being mortal enemies, had a profound and lasting impact on the cultural, political, and ideological shape of Iran and the wider region.
And the sources rightly caution us about judging them too easily.
Definitely. Trying to make definitive moral judgments about figures from almost 1,000 years ago is incredibly difficult, especially when, as the sources remind us, the historical accounts we have were often written by either themselves, their supporters, or their sworn enemies. So bias is almost certainly built in.
Okay, so looking back at all this material, pulling it together, that simple legend of the school friends really just dissolves, doesn't it?
Completely. It gives way to this much more complex, much grittier story. It's about deep religious divides, raw political power struggles, brilliant strategy on both sides, really, and this absolutely terrifying level of ideological devotion.
Hasan Sabbah, building a state from a mountaintop, using belief and, let's face it, fear, as incredibly powerful weapons.
Right. And Nizam al-Molk, the master administrator, the builder of the vast Seljuk Empire, leaving behind things like the Nizamiya schools that shaped Islamic thought for centuries.
Their conflict wasn't just personal. It really reflected these huge undercurrents, these massive forces that were shaping the entire region's future.
And think about that power of belief we kept coming back to. How ideology, as the sources suggest, could inspire such extreme loyalty, such self-sacrifice in the Fedayeen, apparently without needing drugs or external coercion in the way the legends sometimes suggest.
It makes you wonder, doesn't it? What does that tell us about the fundamental forces that drive human beings to commit extreme acts, both back then and maybe even now? It's definitely a question these sources leave you thinking about. Well, thanks for joining us on this exploration into the complex world of Hasan Sabbah and Khajeh Nezam al-Molk.